Ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Coast-to-Coast Combat Hour. I'm your host, Matthew Hawkins, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host, Ed Carbajal. Ed, how you doing, my man?
I'm good, man. We had to run this train without you last week, but thanks to Ben Duffy from Sure Dog stepped up and willingly. He's also a listener of this podcast, so thanks again to Ben Duffy and the folks over at Sure Dog.
Yeah, since I've been on, there was a lot of action, a lot of news that came out over the last week, and we got a bunch of events to look forward to this weekend. Biggest news that well, I guess the biggest news, actually fight news, to come out was UFC China over the weekend. I don't know if you caught the card. I actually set my alarm to wake me up at 4:30 in the morning so I could catch the co-main and main event. And as a result, I was able to see a title change. Weili Zhang becomes the first Chinese UFC champion in the promotion's history, finishing Jessica Andrade in 42 seconds by TKO. I imagine you at least caught the highlights of that.
Caught the highlights, caught the finish. Obviously, you know where that aired, so I did not watch it. But I find it interesting. I mean, just the grand, the whole everything that's going on with this sport. Coincidentally, more news came out with one championship trying to make their way here next year. So I just found that to be a coincidence that jumped out again. First mention, I wrote the article for Sure Dog in July, and then I wrote another one today for my MMA news, and I just find it coincidental that with the UFC making their move over there, that they keep talking about coming over here. So yeah, man, I mean, I'm looking forward to the type of competition that they bring, but I do have to say I made a mistake with that fight. So the first time they fought, I had Rose picked to win, and if you recall, she was winning right up until she lost when she got slammed. So my dumbass, for some reason, thought Andrade was going to win, and I picked her to win. And then as Weili Zhang started clapping her up, I remembered, well, wait a minute, she's not as great as the odds makers made her out to be, and here's proof. And so I actually think if Rose gets motivated to come back, that'd be a nice fight to see between them two.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's fair. I don't think you're the only one that was picking Andrade to defend her title. I think a lot of people thought Zhang was being thrown to the wolves in just a blatant attempt to try to get a Chinese champion, and I mean, it may have worked, but or it did work, but I don't know if that was necessarily the reason. I mean, after seeing her fight, seeing her body type, I mean, she is a muscular force at 115 pounds. You forget how great Rose is based on when she gets dropped on her head, but and maybe it's just the flavor of the month, but Zhang seems like the real deal, and I'm not sure how really anybody matches up with her. But again, fights with Rose, Joanna, even Watterson are all interesting bouts at that.
Henry Cejudo.
Yeah, that guy needs to. That's ridiculous. I look forward to the day he loses at this point. But good for him. I mean, he's getting his name out there. We talk about that all the time. Enough of these guys sit quietly and don't do interviews and don't put their name out there and then complain about pay. He's definitely going to be getting eyes on whoever he fights in his next bout. But big win for Zhang. Big win for the UFC. Financially, they just picked up a champion that has a billion fellow countrymen. So, it might be one of those situations, though, where if a tree falls in the middle of the forest and no one's around it, it'd actually fall. I don't know how many people watched that. Obviously, it blew up on social media. But we don't see title fights very often in foreign countries like this in off times. I think for the very reason that if this happens, very few people in the casual fan base are aware of it until the next fight. I mean, I can't recall. I think she was on the main card of 235 against Tisha Torres. But other than that, I mean, I saw her fight at 227, but I believe she was the first fight of the night that evening. That was her UFC debut. And then she fought on a fight night. But she's taking out some big names now. Taking down the champ, taking down Tisha Torres, Jessica Aguilar, and Daniela Taylor are all fair competition. So, and it's 20 wins in a row now. So that that puts her in a special special level right there. And I think it's good. I think the more international fighters, the better. As you talk about the Asian market kind of at a point now where I talked about it, coming into this year with Nolan King when we had him on, about how I was hoping Ryzen would really explode, and they seem to be doing all right. I know that they get good live crowds, and I think they still get a fair good of viewers on TV. One's on TNT now, so they're making their move. They got a huge double event coming up here, I believe, on October 12th. Names all over the board: Eddie Alvarez, Demetrius Johnson, all their champions, and now this for the UFC in China. So could be a good thing. I wonder. We see Bellator partnering with Ryzen, and I think it's just a matter of time before we see a full co-promoted card in Ryzen or Bellator doing perhaps a piggyback show, back-to-back night with them and Ryzen, and getting their own Bellator Japan event. Seems long overdue in my opinion, since they've had Fedor and Quentin Jackson and these guys on the roster. I've been surprised that they haven't tried to Vanderlei, all those guys. I'm surprised they didn't try to move in there and have kind of a super show in Japan. But I think we're heading that way, and I think Asian MMA across the board and all MMA promotions right now seem to be doing pretty damn well. Yeah.
Good for business. Competition is good for business.
Speaking of business, one of the biggest free agents in all of MMA also made a splash kind of out of nowhere. I believe it was yesterday. We got a tweet sent out by Scott Coker with a red alarm bell saying Bellator was going to announce its new big signing. And there's not many more bigger names in the world of combat sports right now than Cyborg, Cris Cyborg, and she's now a Bellator fighter under contract with Bellator. I believe a 3-year deal, rumored to be, quoted as the biggest female contract of all time. I'm not sure. Take that with a grain of salt. She's getting good money if she's willing to leave the UFC limelight to really go to Bellator and become a big fish in a. It's not really a small pond by way of promotion per se, but probably will have a much deeper weight class and much more competition in the Bellator cage, aside from a rematch with Amanda Nunes. So I think it's great. You tweeted me that she's going to be signing autographs this Saturday up in San Jose prior to 226 for them. And I think that's what's good what Bellator does. Obviously, they're probably paying her. It's always what I say about these fighters: pay them some money, let them go sign autographs, let them meet fans. There'll likely be some Bellator fans there that are at their first event. They'll get a chance to meet Cyborg. They'll look her up, realize she's the killer she is, and it'll gain another fan for life. So I think it's great how Bellator does it. I think it's great that they signed her. Great for competition, great for the MMA fan, and great for the MMA world. So, I think you agree with me pretty much on all that.
Yeah, no, I do. The press release they sent out after said it's a multi-year, multi-fight contract. So they didn't really say how many years, but I would imagine 3 years is a standard. And then the other thing was that Coker told MMA Junkie today, I believe, that she's pretty much going to get a shot at Julia Budd as soon as they're ready to go. I thought they were going to try to start another Grand Prix because Cyborg's video talked about how she was excited to fight, a lot of times a year, and obviously the Grand Prix have been doing that. I mean, to the point that McDonald wanted to take a break, which I guess he kind of got because he's fighting in October, late October. But yeah, I mean, no matter what they do, she's obviously there's a division there for her with plenty of ladies ready to go. And she won't have to kill herself cutting weight or deal with any of the other stuff she was dealing with at the UFC. So, yeah, man, I think me and you are on the same page. You wrote that really nice thing. I mean, the thing about Cyborg, she's really, people like to say Ronda Rousey with women's MMA history, but it's really her and like Gina Carano when you think about the inception of it and the beginning. and one of the biggest fights that was the inaugural title was her and Gina Carano, and you actually have a really nice piece that you wrote about it because you were there with photos and everything for that fight over at the blogboardjungle.com. So it's kind of just like, it's history in the making, but you have to also wonder how much longer. I mean, this might be her last run in a promotion, I would think.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that. I don't think she'll go anywhere else. I think, but I think this is a perfect home for her at this point of her career.
Yeah.
I also think that you do the Julia Budd fight now. I like the idea of a Grand Prix, but we've seen through MMA history that when you try to set stuff up, if they want to fight the first fight of the Grand Prix, that's fine. But that kind of like we're getting with Archuleta right now and Pitbull coming up in the featherweight Grand Prix, but. I just feel like you don't pass up on the chance. That's kind of their female super fight right now. That's the fight that everybody talked about. Anything could happen. Bud could go out, fight some lower contender, get knocked out, get injured. Cyborg could do the same. There's a lot of things that could happen. So I think you strike while it's hot. You have them fight, and then you could set up a Grand Prix after that, perhaps. Maybe even just do a 4-woman I do a 4-woman one-night tournament to set up the next or the next contender, something like that. I think makes a little more sense because the division's still not really that deep. I suppose you could do eight women, but if you got after that, you start to scrape the bottom of the barrel. I think you need to develop a little bit more talent before you necessarily throw them into a title contention tournament. But that's just my opinion, and we'll see what happens. But I think that's the smart move because Bud Cyborg's a headline event they can put somewhere.
Oh yeah.
I also think that I know Cyborg, although her social media has always been a little sketchy about who's doing it and what they're saying. Over the years, she's always talked about doing boxing, and this seems like that could open up that avenue.
Coker actually addressed that to Junkie today too in the same article. That if she wants to box, she's allowed to do that a couple times a year, but it would be something that Bellator is involved with, and it obviously would be a DAZN thing because DAZN's got a lot of boxing. So, I mean, Coker and Eddie Hearn, they do a lot of planning together there because they're both under the DAZN too. So, I mean, that's definitely something we could see.
Yeah. I know Jorina Bars, who has a win over her in Lion Fight Muay Thai, is I don't think she's longer under contract with. She might be still under contract with Bellator. I don't know what her deal is as far as Bellator kickboxing. I know she has some fights set up outside of that organization, but perhaps they still own her rights in the United States. That could be an interesting thing in another kickboxing rematch. Ideally, in my mind, I'd like to see something crazy in Japan, maybe between the two of them, where they do a 3-minute round of MMA, then they put on the boxing gloves, do a 3-minute round of that. Maybe we kind of get some kind of mixed and matched bout craziness where it would allow them basically the best, arguably the best female mixed martial artist against the best female kickboxer in the world. Would be something that would be pretty cool to see. So there just seems like there's a ton of opportunities. We've talked about pro wrestling in the past. I think all that's open to Cyborg signing with Bellator now, and I think that if she plays it smart, gets some wins, doesn't get caught doing anything illegal, I should say, doesn't get caught on drugs, doesn't get caught with anything stupid. If she plays this smart, I think there's enough time in her career still to really expand on her fame and gain a lot of momentum as far as making a lot of money. I mean, it's there to be made, and it'll be interesting. We got like you said, the Bellator with DAZN, that opens up a lot of boxing windows there, really across the globe. So I think it's great. I look forward to her first fight. I actually look forward to getting an autograph and a picture with her on Saturday prior to the event. So that should be pretty cool.
Yeah, you can try to get her on this podcast.
Yeah, no, I try to reach out to people. It's harder in that kind of a setting.
Who are you telling?
Yeah, no, I know. Yeah. I know. I guess the key there is always make sure they have Skype because
yeah.
Thanks to Google Hangouts, that is no longer an option for us.
Yeah.
But Yeah. That brings us really to this weekend, and it's an action-packed weekend. There's Invicta on Friday. There's more combat sports this weekend than anybody can really even watch. But the big fights are start Friday or Saturday morning. I'm sorry, UFC 242.
Yeah.
Pay-per-view main card starts at 2 p.m. Eastern time, so it's kind of an odd start time for the United States. With that said, it's also not the deepest card in the world. There's a lot of potential exciting fights, but really this card comes down to the top two bouts. Co-main event, a rematch between 16-4 Paul Felder fights Edson Barbosa, who defeated him a couple years ago. Barbosa 20-7, one of those guys who's pretty much fought everybody in the division. Kind of a weird rematch, I guess, for me. Not one that I saw coming. Potential great fight, always a potential great fight. Barbosa beat him up pretty good in their first fight, but Felder is always game. When you see somebody finish somebody and beat them the way that Barbosa did in their first bout, it's hard for me to pick against him in the rematch. The first fight was actually a decision, but it was unanimous, and it was Felder came into the fight undefeated at the time, so it was a shellacking pretty much. It was one-sided. I got to go with Barbosa. I'll be pulling for Felder. I'd like to see him get the win here. I enjoy watching him fight, and I like his attitude and his fight everybody's attitude and style, I guess. But it's hard for me to pick against a guy who's already beat somebody and Felder coming. I don't know. That's just the way I see it. How did you see that fight when you broke it down?
Well, in doing my homework, I mean, obviously I took into account the first fight and everything, but I also took into account time passed and the amount of losses that Barbosa has suffered recently. I mean, I know Felder has had some injuries he had to deal with and stuff, but he's coming off a win versus Barbosa coming off a loss. And then if you look at like their last few fights, Barbosa has more losses. 2 of them, I think, were by knockout or TKO. So you have to wonder how much damage, these guys, they always leave a little bit of themselves, excuse me, in the cage when they fight fights and take losses like that. So you have to wonder if that's going to affect Barbosa. Barbosa's last fight was against Justin Gaethje, if I'm not mistaken. And, Justin Gaethje, I feel like Justin Gaethje definitely leaves his mark on you whether you win or lose against him. So
yeah, he put him down hard in that fight. So that's a good point. That's definitely a good point. I think, and not to mention a couple fights prior, Nurmagomedov put one of his beatings on him where he landed several hundred punches. So that all makes sense.
Yeah. So because of that, I'm actually leaning towards Felder, and I know, I mean, not for nothing, you're in line with all the odds makers and stuff, and me and odds and picking fights lately. I've been below my regular over 60% accuracy that I had in the spring. I'm under that now. I think I'm like 57% with my accuracy, which is not so great. So who knows? I mean, you're probably right, but that's why I'm leaning towards Felder.
That makes sense. Then that brings us to the main event, which is a much anticipated bout. Khabib Nurmagomedov returns to the cage after flying out of the cage and attempting to flying drop kick and flying hammer fist Dylan Dennis after his destruction of Conor McGregor. He fights Dustin Poirier, coming off of his win over Max Holloway in a Fight of the Year candidate. Interim champion Poirier, undisputed champion, really, Nurmagomedov. I've said it since I saw Nurmagomedov fight at UFC 205 live. I don't see anybody beating him, and until somebody does, I just can't. I can't see it happening. I feel like I haven't really seen him in danger in any of these big fights. He hits big punch. I mean, he drops Conor McGregor. He out wrestles the hell out of him. He submits him. He just mauls people, and I feel like his base and the Sambo wrestling base is really about as good as you can get for an MMA base. again until somebody hits you with a giant uppercut and breaks your jaw. But I just don't see that happening. And I love Dustin Poirier. I mean, he is one of my favorite fighters. Awesome dude. One of the most friendly people I've ever met and had a chance to chat with. But I gotta go with Nurmagomedov. I think he goes to 28-0, and I think he cements himself even deeper as one of the greats in MMA history, especially at lightweight.
Yeah, I mean, Dustin Poirier, he's evolved a lot as a fighter. He's probably the best we've ever seen him. I mean, his confidence is super, super high. But and even when I try to, I mean, he's a plus 365 underdog. But even when I try to look at, probably the worst I've seen Khabib do was when he fought Al Iaquinta, and he still, managed to win that. But Iaquinta, boxed him up a little bit. And so if you want to say because there's people that try to critique Khabib's striking as being the hole in his game, but his grappling is so overpowering that I think that outweighs wherever his holes are. Like, he's got superior grappling and control, and I think a lot of that comes from training with. I mean, he fights at 155 and trains with the former heavyweight champion of the world regularly. So chances are, no matter how big and strong you think you are at 155, and Poirier is pretty strong for 155. I don't think that's anything Khabib hasn't dealt with before. So, yeah, like you said, it's hard to pick against him. I mean, it'd be nice, not for nothing. I'm gonna put $2 that Poirier knocks Khabib out, because it'll pay like $10 or whatever. But outside of that, I mean, I'm pretty sure I'm gonna lose $2.
Yeah, it's a hard one. I mean, you mentioned the Iaquinta fight, and that's really as close of a fight as we've seen. But
yeah,
in that fight, he still won 50-43 or 50-44. Yeah. I mean, it was still a shellacking on the cards, and I felt like it was one of those fights where he takes you down and he just mauls you so early in the fight. He seems to take the will out of guys. Even if guys survive, it seems like they're just on survival mode at that point. And even if, for instance, like Al were to land a punch, I just don't know if there's enough there for them to be able to go in for the finish without that. I don't know. It just seems like he's got the mental edge so much after early in the fights. He takes them down and does the damage. But that should be interesting. I saw Dana White say that it's trending for a huge pay-per-view. I can't believe that.
No, me neither.
I just can't. None of these international pay-per-views in the United States have ever really done great.
Especially when it starts at 11 a.m. or whatever it is, my time.
Yeah, I like the start time. I think it makes for a great Saturday, just day hanging out, barbecuing, hanging out with some buddies and stuff. But it's not conducive to the average person.
No, for you, that's running errands and shit time for me. I'm lucky if I can. I'm gonna record the prelims, but I have to skip jiu-jitsu so I can watch this, so I can write my 7 takeaways piece for MMAnews.com. So,
well, the truth is, I'll actually probably be catching some of the early prelims at the airport, and then hopefully I will be watching the main event when I land in San Jose, because that brings us to Bellator 226, which, as I said, I'll be heading up to with my cousin to check out on Saturday evening. A nice little 20-fight card that Bellator is bringing for us. Kicks off, after you got the 14 prelims, we get a rare 6-fight main card, which is kind of cool. Gaston Bolaños kicks that off, and then we get into the featherweight Grand Prix, 16-man tournament, which half the bouts take place this Saturday at 226. The following half of the tournament takes place on September 28th at Bellator 228 in LA out here. But that kicks off some of the fights. I know we have some interest in some of these. The first bout of the tournament, Sam Cecilia faces Pedro Carvalho. Probably the least interesting of all the fights. Sam Cecilia, former UFC veteran, comes in. had some success here in Bellator. But the next fight really is one that I think we'll both be interested in.
Oh yeah.
Emmanuel Sanchez against Taiwan Claxton, who you interviewed for the show a couple weeks back. Sanchez, former title contender, fights the undefeated Claxton at 5-0. That should be an exciting fight.
Yeah, definitely. And you know what's funny is Claxton's not shy about admitting that that Sanchez has experience on him, and he's got everything, with all the things that people are saying about the matchup, because with him being 5-0 and Sanchez having the 18-4 record. But the thing is, I mean, Claxton's training and he's actually really cerebral. I mean, he's into coding and stuff. If you haven't listened to the interview, I actually added the audio for that to the episode that you were out on. So if folks want to listen to last week's episode, you can listen to the entire interview where he talks about that. But his training and just his mindset for the way once he's in camp, he doesn't plan on. He recognizes all the strengths of Sanchez, but he's not afraid to pretty much give Sanchez the hardest time that he's given anybody. I mean, he's been wanting competition. First time I talked to him, he said he wanted to fight 5 times in a year, and he only got to fight 3 times. So he's super happy, and he comes from wrestling. The other thing he alluded to was that it's not something he's not used to. I mean, he's competed 3 times in one day. So I mean, he's a young, hungry, strong athlete, and more durable than we give him credit for, because obviously he's been winning. So we haven't seen him take too much damage. So this might be the fight where we see that, but I wouldn't be surprised if he pulls off a win. I mean, if he does pull off a win, I wouldn't be surprised if Bellator starts pushing him, with their marketing team.
Yeah, I think his wrestling will be really a strong suit for him against Sanchez. I see him possibly being able to really. It might not be the most exciting fight, but I definitely could see him grinding out a win here. Sanchez is obviously dangerous everywhere, but I think it does better at this point for Bellator for Claxton to win, keep his undefeated streak going, and really builds up another contender. Sanchez will always be there, and there's plenty of fights that he could have. But speaking of undefeated guys, that brings us to the next fight, where we get Adam Borics, who's coming off of a huge finish of Aaron Pico, which really, as it turns out, seems like it was almost a qualifying fight for this Grand Prix. He faces off against former featherweight champion Pat Curran, 23-8, Borics 13-0. Hard fight to call. Curran is obviously always game, but he seems to be a little bit on the backside of his run now. And Borics is 13-0. Again, he was losing the fight up until the finish of Pico, so you don't want to fall into the Andrade thing, but
yeah, that's a good point.
So it makes it a little bit hard to see, but I gotta say, I'd like to see the younger undefeated fighter move on. I think the Grand Prix gets cool if we start seeing some undefeated guys moving on in this tournament, especially younger guys that don't have a huge name yet.
Yeah, no, I mean that's a good point, and it would be nice to see, but that the unpredictability of these things is always something to think about too, because as much as we like to have faith in these young guys and how they get seeded in the tournament, we've already seen like Ed Ruth lose to Neiman Gracie when that tournament started. So I mean, you never really know how something's going to go, because a lot of people thought that was going to be a challenging matchup or what have you, and Gracie wound up taking down Ed Ruth, which I didn't think was going to happen, but hey, Neiman Gracie. But anyway, so yeah, I mean, I don't know, man. I'm with you. It'd be nice to see Borics win, but like you said, when you see these Bellator vets fight too, it's hard to root against them too.
Yeah, exactly. So I just think it's going to be a good fight, and I saw the brackets. I don't know if the brackets actually stand, if they're solid brackets, or if they just do kind of random seeding depending on how the results of these fights come out. So that could be interesting. If Claxton and Borics sort of both win, could potentially see a situation like Gracie and Ruth, where we get a couple of young undefeated fighters going at it. That brings us to the co-main event of the night, which is also a Grand Prix bout, and kind of my sentimental favorite for the tournament, Daniel Straus, coming off of a big win after a long layoff, after an automobile accident that almost took his life. He's, again, multiple-time former champion. He faces Derek Campos, who is always dangerous and can really bring the violence to the cage. I can't go against Straus. I don't know if he's completely back. He didn't fight the best competition in his return bout, but he looked really good in the fight. So, I'd like to see Straus win. I think it would be cool. I think it would be an awesome story if he was somehow able to get through this tournament and set up another fight with Pitbull. They fought a handful of times already. They fought 4 times already. So, yeah. It'd be kind of cool to me if you were to see Pitbull Straus 5 maybe at the end of the Grand Prix.
Yeah.
A lot of storylines going into that one.
Yeah, no, and I remember I watched that fight where he lost the title to him, and the fight was good. And I remember actually, I think I put it on social media that I would not mind seeing a Pitbull Straus 5. Obviously with what he went through, yeah, I know he came back and won, but again, I'm always concerned with how much has he returned. Hey, maybe those were the cobwebs shaking off and stuff in that last fight, and that's all said and done, and he's Daniel Straus is back, but you never know, man. So I would like to see him, like I said, with the same thing with Curran, man. I like to see the vets win. Excuse me. Sorry, it's freaking crazy weather here in Jersey.
Yeah,
but I wouldn't be surprised if Campos pulls one off too.
Yeah, I think all the fights, all 4 of the opening round fights this night are really competitive, and I think that's the cool thing about this tournament is we really don't know. We get Archuleta and Pitbull in the opening round, so in theory, one of the top contenders disappears from the tournament, and we really, you got AJ McKee is another top name, but he's got a tough fight, so it'll be interesting to see how everything unfolds, how they do the seeding, if they stick to an actual bracket or if they just, I don't know. I always think it's cool to kind of do the old school UFC thing where you just kind of everybody that wins, you put their name into a hat and then you draw the next round. Do something just kind of off the wall. Make it like a lottery. Put them all in little balls and pull them out of the hopper and stuff like that, and make kind of a do it during a press conference and kind of set it off. I think stuff like that's kind of cool, and it doesn't allow for guys necessarily to have such a mental advantage of preparing for somebody or thinking ahead. They do the drawing, and then maybe 6-8 weeks later the fight comes up. So that'll be interesting. But again, Grand Prix winners brings us to the main event, where Ryan Bader, coming off of his heavyweight Grand Prix heavyweight championship bout win, faces Chet Congo, who's on a huge winning streak in Bellator, a true heavyweight, 30-10-2 in his career. Bader 27-5 between heavyweight and light heavyweight, with obviously the majority of that light heavyweight in the UFC. I feel like probably most people are picking Bader, and it seems like the easy pick, but ever since this fight was announced, there's been something inside me that's just been thinking that Chet Congo somehow figures out a way to win this fight. And Congo will probably get knocked out with an overhand right 10 seconds into the fight, like he did when he leaves his hands down to Roy Nelson and gosh, I think Mitrione did him wrong. A few guys did him wrong early in his UFC run, where he seemed to always want to keep his hands down. But in his run in Bellator, I've seen him fight live a handful of times, and obviously we've seen him on TV all the other times. He seems like a different animal, and if he guards his chin, I don't know where to me, it's a toss-up, but I lean towards Congo for some reason. I feel like there's a chance he could somehow end up on top. I don't know. Again, it doesn't make any sense. Everything calls for Bader, but truth be told, Bader made it through the heavyweight tournament, beating King Mo, who is really not a true heavyweight. Out-wrestled Mitrione, who's on and off, and then he got a quick knockout of Emelianenko in really a one-punch fight, as well as, and the one-punch fight was also the King Mo fight. So I'm really curious to see how he does in a little bit longer of a competitive heavyweight fight, and that could really change my opinion on where Bader stands as far as a true heavyweight. But I don't know.
Point.
Yeah. So
that's a good point. But I mean, so my only thing is, I mean, yeah, you might not be off thinking about Congo, because if I'm not mistaken, I believe Congo might have a reach advantage over him, and he used to be a decent striker, or better than he used to be. I don't know. I mean, he's been fighting for a while, and I mean, I hope he doesn't hear this, because he definitely checks media when he sees them about what they say. So, I mean, I'm trying to be I'm just being as whatchamacallit, objective as I possibly can be, as you are for the fight. But I think I mean, I do think, you know, Coker's been blowing up Bader as a heavyweight champion, that the best champion that he's ever seen out now, and I mean, I think I think his wrestling may be better than Congo's used to dealing with. You know, I put up that video from the open workouts where he was drilling his like that attack style wrestling that he does. So maybe he can, you know, dominate. It might not be the most entertaining thing, but he could probably control it for a win. But I don't think you're off either. I do think Congo might have a reach advantage, and if he uses it right, he could probably tag Bader up. My problem with Congo is that sometimes he just fights really weird, you know, like off.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And I'm looking back. He didn't fight, or he beat Mitrione, Mark Hunt. So he went down to some big strikers. Mark Hunt, Roy Nelson caught him early in their fights. Frank Mir did at a time when Frank Mir was huge and still a real force. And I mean, he's got losses to Herring and Cain Velasquez and stuff. So nothing to scoff at in his career. And I hear what you're saying about his fight style, but
yeah,
I'll be interested to see how Bader matches up with Congo's strength, because one thing Congo always brings to the cage is strength, and if he's able to kind of muscle him up against the cage and use his knees, again, hopefully not Crow Cop style, and he's able to get those knees into the gut as opposed to into the cup, but I just feel like Congo with his elbows, with his there's a lot to the. I feel like he hurts you when he gets a chance to hurt you. He doesn't really let you off the hook per se, if he gets you reeling. So I don't know. Like I said, a lot of it points to Bader as kind of the hot ticket right now, coming off that Grand Prix. But you know, if I'm being objective, even as a huge Fedor fan, he really kind of had an easy run through it. Not necessarily beating all easy opponents, but he didn't have any kind of firefight. I would have never thought he would have got through Fedor and King Mo with only throwing 2 punches. Yeah. I mean, that's unheard of. The gods were on his side, as I'd say, going through that tournament. But I don't know. I just hope it's a good heavyweight fight. Bellator finally, we kind of have a heavyweight championship that's potentially going to get some momentum going now. Minakov held that for a while and disappeared. So the heavyweight division disappeared basically for about, 3, 4, or 5 years, whatever it exactly was. It seemed like it was forever. But I wouldn't mind seeing Congo win. And I don't know. I don't know exactly what that does for the division. There's a bunch of good fights. Minakov coming off of a huge knockout of Tim Johnson in his last fight after Ayala had to pull out the day of the fight. But I think the heavyweight division in Bellator has a chance to really get some momentum going and get some good championship fights in the very near future.
Yeah, man. I mean, that's definitely going to be a busy weekend. I mean, on top of that, CES 58 is out here on the East Coast, so I have no idea what I'm going to be watching after 242. Obviously, the press conference and all that stuff for 242, I have to watch it, but then I'll be catching up on something. I think 220. What you're going to be at is the Bellator events, the Zone exclusive, isn't it?
Yeah, but the first 14 fights will be on the Bellator app. Mm-hmm. So you can watch the first 14 fights before you even get over to DAZN. It'll also be on DAZN for people that have the subscription. So there's several ways to watch the prelims. And then as you state, the main card kicks off at 10 o'clock your time, 7 o'clock Pacific. So it's going to be an action-packed weekend. Check out Greg Baca Hitman's combat schedule on Twitter. Check out his link. He has it all, the events, all the links. Everybody can watch. It's magical work that guy does in the MMA world. So definitely check that out. But while you're at Twitter, you can check me out at MMA Hawk 21. You can catch Ed at Carbazol. On Instagram, I'm also MMA Hawk 21, and Ed is at Carbeerzol. The show is at Combat Hour on Twitter and at Coast-to-Coast Combat Hour on Instagram. Stay tuned for our audio listeners. Ed was able to catch up with Derek Anderson a couple weeks prior to his big Bellator 229 fight out here at the Pechanga Indian Reservation. As I stated earlier, unfortunately, Hangouts dropped out on us, so we weren't able to do our normal show interview, but Ed always does a good job with the phone interviews, so he was able to get some words with Derek. So again, for our audio listeners, or if you're watching on video, click on the audio link and you can skip to the last 10-15 minutes of the show and catch that quick interview with Derek, who worked out a schedule prior to his training to come on and talk to Ed. So give him a listen.
All right, cool. Peace, y'all.